Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Father-Son Packers podcast, your source for Packers news, notes, and analysis. My name is Tommy. I'm one of your hosts, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my dad, Matt. Dad, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. We are getting closer and closer to game action. We had what was the next best thing with a joint practice yesterday with more video clips than usual, thanks to it being at like the Bengals facility, I think.
This was one of the benefits of having it be an away joint practice. I didn't even realize this at the time. I was like, oh, they're going to have to travel. Matt LaFleur's talking about, like, oh, it'll be good bonding experience for the team. No,
they went to some kind of steakhouse, right?
I hadn't seen that, but the big benefit was we actually got recorded video that was not, like, illegal recorded video of the Packers practice, and
right.
It was nice to see.
Has anybody seen a tweet from Big B in the last week?
I did. No, the Packers police have not gotten him yet. The film police have not come and tracked him down yet. But yeah, no. So Packers joint practice, that was the next best thing to a game. And the next best thing to a game was family night on Saturday. And then we got the preseason game against the Bengals tomorrow. We're recording to you on the night of Thursday, August 10th. So we got a lot to talk about here today. Before we get into any of that, though, just to pitch a couple of things. If you like what you hear here today, come give us a follow on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. We post when we have new episodes out. We retweet articles we find interesting, pieces of news from practice, video clips, tons of video clips right now retweeted over there, a bunch from Joe Goodberry, who's a Cincinnati Bengals reporter, and then a bunch of other ones from Packers reporters. So yeah, come give us a follow there. We'd really appreciate it. And then if you're a fan of this podcast, you can find us on your podcast platform of choice, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. You can subscribe to us anywhere there. You can even subscribe to us on YouTube. We post all of our episodes there as well, and it would really help our numbers if you did subscribe to us there. But yeah, so check us out wherever you want to check us out. We're going to be doing one episode the rest of the off season, and then once the season starts in earnest, we're going to be doing 2 a weeks. So that'll be really exciting. We're entering our second year here with the Father-Son Packers podcast. We're still ironing out some of the kinks, but we're getting a little better each day, and that's the goal, as Matt LaFleur would say.
Yeah, I think we've crossed over into year 2 now, right?
I started counting. Oh, you mean technically? I think our first episode was Packers-Niners preseason last year. So I would say after.
Okay, so after the first preseason was the post game was the first one.
Yes, and so this.
So I would say
exactly. I would say officially 1 year after this Bengals preseason episode that we'll do next week, but. Like I said, we have a lot to talk about here today, including a little bit of research that you did, Dad, but we'll get to that in a second. Let's start with the news, however. Like we said, we got a lot to talk about. We haven't spoken with you guys since family night, since the joint practices, et cetera, et cetera. We still got to talk about the preseason game tomorrow, but first the news, some roster moves for the Packers. The Packers, after family night, cut quarterback Danny Etling, who had been taking a lot of reps with the twos, so that was a bit surprising.
Yeah, that was a little surprising. I was not expecting that, especially so soon.
Yeah,
and I saw this like they must like what Clifford's doing.
Yeah, well, I think it's more just like, are you really going to cut a 5th round pick? No. I'm a little surprised at the Magoo versus Etling that they went with Etling, but at the same time, Etling's 29. Magoo I think is a little younger, has that
27.
27, I think. Yeah, that sounds right. And, it sounds like they've had Etling around for a little while. I'm a little surprised they didn't want a little more experience in that room with the offensive system. But, that's what they're going with. So, and the corresponding move was the Packers added running back Nate McCrary. He was part of the 2021 draft class. He spent time with the Ravens and Panthers last year. 6 foot, 213, pretty good athlete. I don't know if
it's a over 9 RAS, if I recall, like 9.4 or something. I didn't look it up before this, but it's in that vicinity.
A very good athlete. And so a lot of that's probably because, as we'll talk about in a little bit, Lou Nichols got a little dinged up last week and hasn't participated in the last few practices. So it could just be adding another body there for these preseason games since, Jones and Dillon are probably not going to play. I'd be a little surprised if McCrary makes a whole lot of noise on this roster, but you never know. So they added that. And then a few injury updates. Dad, the biggest piece of news for the Packers in the last week is this. Rashawn Gary is officially off the PUP. He came off the PUP on Monday. That's the physically unable to perform list. And he's not back to doing team drills yet, but he's looked pretty good in individual drills. If you want to check out on Twitter, we've retweeted a bunch of clips of him, doing the bags, running a couple individual drills. And it's just nice to see him out on the field already. And, maybe
possibly being available for week 1. Dad, I mean, this has to be the most exciting piece of news, right?
It was very exciting to see. And he hasn't, I don't think he's, as far as we know, he hasn't skipped a day of practice either. Though maybe there's some walkthrough that we didn't see about.
From the practices that have been public, he's participated in every one. He was even running wind sprints on the sideline during the joint practices, apparently, because he's a psycho.
Right. It seemed like that was maybe his own doing because he couldn't be in the team drills. Like, I'm just going to be sprinting up and down the sideline here.
It's very on brand for him, which is awesome because
Plus, it was like crazy. It was hot and crazy humid there, apparently.
Oh, yep. And then, he's got to get he's probably got to get his like football lungs back under him. I'm sure he's been working really hard conditioning wise while he's been doing all the PT he's been doing. But, always good to see. I mean, he's just such a like vocal and emotional leader for the whole team. And it's just so good to have him back. Some other injury updates. Grant DuBose is also back from injury on Monday. It's the first practice of the offseason for the rookie 7th-round pick receiver out of Charlotte. So good to see him kind of get back before the preseason games start underway. And so he's going to have like a real chance to still make this roster because there's still time for him to prove and make a little bit of noise in this camp and get one of those receiver spots. It's going to be hard, but he's not back too late. Is the big thing.
I don't know if he's doing any team stuff yet. He was running some routes on air in some of the clips I saw, but I don't know if he's quite up to any team drills yet, or whether. And I don't know if we'll see him in this first preseason game or not.
Yeah, and then Josiah DeGuara after missing
we'll find out tomorrow.
Yeah, and then Josiah DeGuara after missing about a week with a calf injury. Was back on Wednesday for the joint practices with Cincinnati. Very exciting for him as someone who went to the University of Cincinnati to be kind of back in his old stomping grounds. He didn't participate in the team drills, but it is good to see him, making his way back, and that's not going to be a super long-term thing for him, it sounds like. Beyond that, though, there are still a few players that are out, like we mentioned before. Lou Nichols has been out the past few practices with a shoulder injury, and then Innis Gaines has been out the past few practices with a quad injury. That's something to keep an eye on because the depth at that slot corner spot is a little shaky. Not really clear who the backup behind Nixon is going to be this year. It sounds like, based on what Andy Herman has said from his viewing of the practices, Savage hasn't gotten any snaps there. It's been Gaines behind Nixon mostly, almost exclusively. And then I think perhaps Ballantyne, if I remember correctly, but don't quote me on that. Corey Ballantyne, that is. And then Jake Hansen
I don't know.
Yeah, and then Jake Hansen
Ballantyne has been doing any slot work or not.
Mm-hmm. And then Jake Hansen is still dealing with the same injury as last week, it sounds like. He did line up at guard in some walkthroughs, but not back to doing team drills yet.
I had missed that he was starting to do walkthroughs. Interesting that it was at guard and not at center, because that's where he's mostly been lining up, I think, as the number 2 center so far.
Yeah, it's also hard to know because it is an elbow injury, so it's like, is that going to affect his snapping? And so that's why they're having him at guard. I'm
Maybe.
Pure speculation. Just pure speculation. But yeah, so that kind of does it for the news section of the podcast. Like we said, we're going to talk a little bit about family night, joint practice, and the preseason game coming up. But before we do that, Dad, you had something that you had been kind of working on research-wise, a little bit about the pace of play for the Packers, because I know in the past few years, a lot of people have been a bit frustrated with with the Packers' pace, especially with Aaron Rodgers he liked taking his time. It is what it is. And, by Football Outsiders, neutral pace rate, which kind of takes into account taking out 2-minute drills, end of halves, when teams are down by a lot and they have to play fast, and just kind of when teams are playing how they want to play. The Packers have been a really slow team over the last 3 years. In 2022, they were 28th in pace of play. In 2021, they were 31st in pace of play. And then in 2020, they were 32nd in pace of play. So pretty much the only thing you can say for the Packers is they have been getting a little bit faster each of the last 3 years. But, I think there is some reason to think they might be faster this year with Love than they were with Rodgers. We know Rodgers liked to take his time at the line. We know there were a lot of last-second timeouts. But, Dad, you had some pretty interesting stuff that kind of came of looking at how pace corresponded to winning. And do you want to take it away with that?
Yeah, so I had this thought, which I originally came to like college basketball, where there's this notion that the top teams should be trying to play at a higher pace, and the weaker teams should play at a slower pace, because as a good team, if your point differential is like, let's say, 1 point per possession, the more possessions you have, the greater the total difference will be, and the less you are susceptible to random noise in from play to play affecting the overall outcome. Say like somebody gets a pick six or a botched fumble that's on a punt, a botched punt that's then run to the end zone, having a huge impact on the play. But if you have more total possessions, you might be able to distance yourself enough from the other team so that you would not be affected by those kinds of random chance plays that always pop up. So I wanted to see if there's any correlation between pace of play and win percentage. This notion that, that if you're faster, then you're maybe more likely to win. So I took the Football Outsiders neutral pace of play for the offense, because that's what you have control over. The defense you have less control over. And then compared that for to winning percentage for every team for the last 10 years. So 320 data points graphed, pace of play versus win percentage over. So that gets a scatter plot, and then you try to fit a line to that. And that line, using all the data over the last 10 years, does not show much in the way of a correlation. The R-squared value, which is kind of a statistical measurement of how much of the sort of variance is explained in the data, how much it accounts for, and it's very low. It's like 0.02. So that's a very bad R-squared value. And the slope of the line is kind of a measurement of how much the two data are related to each other. And if it's 0, then they're basically varying independently and have nothing to do with each other. So overall, for the whole for every team over the last 10 years, if you take all that, there's very poor correlation between win percentage and the pace of play. However, as we were discussing this earlier, I decided to do a last-second analysis. What if we just look at the extremes? We take like the 20 fastest teams of the last 10 years and the 20 slowest teams of the last 10 years.
And this was kind of inspired. This was kind of inspired by the ideas, like we were talking. It was like yeah, like there's not really like an impact on winning. Like the only thing that I could think of would be like, or that we could think of would be like the really slow teams are going to get more penalties, because that's the only thing that could really possibly happen there. And it was like, okay, like maybe those really, really slow teams are getting enough like penalties or having to burn timeouts. In case that doesn't ring a bell, the Packers have done that quite a bit. But that's,
why would we think about that? I don't know why that would come to mind.
Like delay of game penalties, a meaningless 5-yard penalty on 2nd and goal. I've never seen one of those before. But anyway, Dad, sorry to interrupt. Take it away.
When you all of a sudden go from a like 1-yard lunge to 6-yard passing down in the red zone, why should that matter? And where would we ever see that? It's never going to happen. But the idea was that maybe the extremes have a difference that are drowned out by all the teams in the middle, that it really doesn't matter if you're somewhere in the middle, 80% or 90%. So I took the top 20 teams, 20 fastest compared to the 20 slowest. So the winning percentage for the 20 fastest teams was on average 60%, while the winning percentage for the 20 slowest teams in the last 10 years, it's only 48%. Now, I haven't done actual statistical tests to see whether these two are significantly different, but that's a pretty big gap, 60% to 48%. And listeners, that bottom 20 slowest teams include Green Bay 2022, Green Bay 2021, and Green Bay 2020. So even though two of those teams had a great winning percentage, it's still, on average, those teams the slowest teams are mostly bad.
Yeah, and I think this is really interesting because
and not nearly as good as the fast teams.
Yeah, and in some ways, this gap between the 20 fastest and 20 slowest, I don't think we think necessarily that the Packers are suddenly going to be this really fast team, because something that were talking to me about earlier is these Shanahan scheme type teams have really large verbiages in their play calls and generally trend towards being slower teams. And so I don't know if we're going to see necessarily that the Packers are going to go from one of these slowest teams of the last decade all the way to being really, really fast. But they're certainly, I think, going to be a much faster team. I mean, it's going to be hard to be slower. They've been one of the 5 slowest teams each of the last 3 years. But I think it's definitely, I would expect at least that they're going to trend towards more being an average pace of play team this next year rather than being like bottom of the pack like they have been with Rodgers. I just, that would be my expectation. I don't know if you have a different expectation, but that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Yeah, and just for comparison, say if you want a little support for this notion of the offensive scheme is driving some of the slow play, San Francisco in 2022 was the 26th in the league in speed, so only a couple spots ahead. And in 2021, they were 28th. So they're slow at getting the plays in too. It's not all Rodgers. But we had like maybe a perfect storm.
Yes.
Between LaFleur and Rodgers.
I think it's a big combination there. The only other thing I can think of is like, hey, run heavier teams, clock's running more, not going to have as many plays per game. Is that something, do you think, or?
You will have fewer plays per game because your rest between plays
is longer,
is on the clock.
Yeah.
So, I mean, people talk about, running, you're actually having generally the same amount of break between snaps. It's just whether that break is while the game clock is running or not.
Exactly. That was the only thing I was thinking of there. But I think it's interesting.
So if you're running, you're going to get fewer plays.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because I think we all expect us to be faster this year, and we're not going to be down in that bottom 20, although being in the bottom 20 hasn't been detrimental to the Packers' success the past 3 years, but also that has been with Rodgers. But also, Rodgers likes taking it slower, and I think a slower pace with Love would not be as good. So, we hope the Packers with Love are a faster-paced team. But anyway, I thought that was really interesting. Thank you, Dad, for crunching those numbers, doing all that analysis.
Some really last-minute number crunching, as in
30 seconds ago.
When we were right.
During the first take of this segment, we crunched a few extra numbers. But anyway, let's move on, though, to Family Night. We still have a lot to talk about here. But let's move on to Family Night. I think we each had 3 things that we found interesting. Do you want to lead us off with what you found most interesting from Family Night, Dad? Yeah,
so the first thing I would mention is Anders Carlson. So I managed not to say Daniel. Had his best day of camp so far at Family Night, where he was 8 for 9 on field goals per Andy Herman, with one miss being on what I think was described as a really horrific snap and a still not good hold. And so you could say, on kicks he actually had a real chance at. He was 8 for 8. And being generous a little bit, but the other thing that's encouraging about this, after he went, I think, like 11 for his previous 22 or something like that, something bad. But this was at Lambeau as well. Under some bright lights, some more scrutiny, 60,000 fans. Like, that's going to be more than you get at a lot of stadiums. If you go to, like, I don't know, watch a Chargers game or somewhere.
A real game environment, Hey, I have a lot of Chargers fan friends. Let's not disparage the Chargers.
But do they show up to the games?
They go to a few games. Yeah, they go to 1 or 2 a year. Let's not I have a lot of Chargers fan friends. I'm going to stick up for them now. I got you guys back. I know you guys are loyal. There aren't as many of you since you moved to LA, but I still know a lot of Chargers fans. But yeah, no, I think it's really exciting. And the 2 takeaways I had from this were, the first is that it was with a combination of holders. With Pat O'Donnell and Danny Whelan splitting time at holder. And so the fact that he's making the kicks with Whelan is really exciting because apparently Whelan's had a really good camp as the second punter. They would save a lot of money if they went with him and cut O'Donnell.
He can boot the ball, too.
He's younger. He can kick the crap out of the ball. But I think the biggest thing is, like, if he can't hold and the holds are bad, we're keeping O'Donnell because it's just not worth the headache.
If he can't hold the ball, then it doesn't matter how far he can punt it.
Because we saw this with Bajorquez. It's just not worth it. It's not worth the extra 5-6 yards a punt. It's just not. But so the fact that he did well as a holder is really good for him. And then the other interesting thing that I heard from the Green 19 podcast, which is a Milwaukee Journal Sentinel podcast, and Tom Silverstein was saying this, was saying that he had actually, going into this practice on family night, had kind of changed his kicking form a little bit, actually. And like, he had felt that apparently he was getting a little bit too much out on the toe, and that was causing him to be a bit inconsistent. And so he had kind of moved his contact point up the instep a little more and had really seen some good results on family night. And then this past week has also been much better than the week previous. And so it's cool to see that, like, there was a actual tangible reason and a change to his kicking approach that actually led to this improvement, and it isn't just like random variance. He's just having a little bit of a hot streak. But yeah, so I thought that was both of those things were very notable in this Anders Carlson thing. I'm trying my best to say Anders because it is Anders. Anything else you wanted to add there?
Yeah, it's nice actually to hear that there is a explanation behind it, which may mean something going forward. It may be more predictive.
Persist. Yeah.
That there's been a change that has led to this improvement.
Yeah. Anything more you wanted to add with Carlson, or should I go to my first one?
Why don't you go to your first one?
Yeah. So my first one is a bit of a downer, and that was that Bakhtiari missed that family night practice. Now, since then, he has practiced both Monday and on Wednesday against the Bengals in his normal capacity, not like full practices or anything, but he was back at practice. So it's not that there is a major like setback or anything, or he's re-injured anything. He was back out there this week, which is good. But the fact that he missed family night after it seemed like he was like building up to being scheduled to practice on family night, and that it seemed like a bit of a last second thing, is a bit concerning. He did speak on Monday with NBC Sports' Peter King, which kind of made me feel a little bit better about this. Some notes from that. The first one's a quote, "This year is definitely night and day compared to last year," end quote. And then he went on to say that he feels a lot better about having, this is more of a paraphrase, that he feels a lot better about having the offseason to actually build up strength as opposed to having to go straight from doing like physical therapy to practicing and playing. He mentioned that like he views the offseason as kind of a time to like, I think the quote was like put armor on.
Put on armor on. I was going to say
exactly.
the put armor on quote.
And kind of like build that strength up so you can make it through a whole year. And he felt like he wasn't able to do that last year because of all the rehab he was having to do. So those notes from Peter King and the fact that he was able to practice this week do definitely give me some encouragement. But the fact that it did seem like his schedule was to practice on family night and then he wasn't able to is obviously not great. Dad, how did you feel about all that?
It was the first time when he didn't practice on family night. It was the first time I was actually worried about his availability this year and how reliable that would be. Because as I said to you, you asked me earlier in the offseason, what will it take? How many days a week does Bakhtiari have to practice for you not to worry about him being available on game days? And my answer was kind of wishy-washy because I didn't actually give you a number. I was like, as many days as they want him to be. So if he's available on the days that they have on their schedule, even if it's like 2 days a week, that's good enough. If he practices on the days that they're planning to have him practice, even if it's only like twice or maybe even once a week, that's the schedule. So this is the first time I felt like he had a schedule. They kind of mentioned it earlier in the week that they were starting his routine of the week to meet Saturday night as the day he would practice, and then it didn't happen. And I was like, oh, that didn't sound good. So I was a little worried about that. It was nice to see him back out again on the very next practice on Monday.
Yeah, I think that was that, and then the fact that he was back again on Wednesday were two very good things. Because I honestly, when he practiced Monday, I was like, oh, he'll take Wednesday off then. And then when they said he was suited up on Wednesday, I was honestly pretty surprised. I was like, oh, like he's going to practice today? I'm surprised he's not taking the day off. But given the fact, they have the game Friday, he's definitely not playing in that preseason game.
I would be surprised if he plays on Friday.
I would be shocked. I would be absolutely shocked because I don't think he's going to play. I would be surprised if Elton plays. I would be surprised if a lot of players play. I think they're going to sit
I
at
wouldn't
least.
be that surprised if Elton plays if Love is playing.
I'd be pretty surprised. I don't think they're going to play him, given the fact that, I mean, it's possible, but I would be surprised. I would be shocked if Bakhtiari plays. But so he's going to get that day off. Dad, what was your second thing from Family Night that you found interesting?
So my second thing is that, well, maybe it's a little more general than just Family Night, but the D-line is doing work and looking good. And Wyatt has really stepped up this year. Maybe the biggest second-year leap of any of the rookies from last year.
I don't want to jinx it,
really
but I'm hopeful.
So
I don't want
far,
to jinx it, but I'm hopeful.
He's been looking really good. And Wooden and Brooks both been making a lot of plays, according to all the reports. And I imagine those are versus the backup O-lineman. They're in with the twos against the number 2 O-line. But they're in the backfield. They're looking quick off the ball, getting sacks, making plays. So that is one of my takeaways from maybe that's more than just Family Night. Maybe that's Family Night the previous practice or two. But
yeah,
I wanted to mention it anyway.
I'm going to save my thoughts on Brooks and Wooden because I actually had some stuff I wanted to talk about them for the joint practices. So I'm going to kind of save my thoughts on that one. But I definitely agree that it's exciting and it's going to be important that they.
we might be overlapping on that one.
I know I put mine in first is all I'm going to say. But anyway, I'm excited
just because
about
I was slow typing.
It's because you got big, meaty thumbs and meaty palms. But anyway.
Yeah, at least I'm not typing on a... Yeah. So just imagine how long it would take if I typed it on my phone.
If you had to type this on a phone, we'd never get an episode done because I've seen you the one at a time text with your thumbs. But anyways,
I have to keep deleting and starting over.
The next thing that I found interesting was that Musgrave took every rep with the ones on offense, and he took snaps at wide receiver and tight end. So it seems like he is going to be a really big part of this offense. Shout out to Justice Mosqueda of Acme Packing Company. He put out an article essentially charting the snap counts of all the televised family night snaps. It was very informative. It was very interesting. It's a must read at this time of the year because, that's one of the big practices when we're actually seeing what the depth chart might look like. But the fact that Musgrave was there for every snap at multiple positions, he's going to be a big part of this offense, and it's going to be really exciting. I think I'm excited to see him.
He is so far ahead of the number 2 tight end in the depth chart.
So far ahead.
It's maybe the biggest gap in any position on the team.
Goodness, that's a good question. Is it the biggest? I think quarterback's probably bigger, but
I suppose it's There's always quarterback.
I was gonna say there's always quarterback, but I think you might be right because when you're taking every snap and they're trying to get you at multiple positions, that's pretty big time. But yeah, so that was the next thing I had. Did you have another one?
Yeah. So my next one was the first team offense. I think it was the first time they scored a 2-minute drill.
It was the first or the second. It was not many more than that. It was
maybe that. I think their best 2-minute drill of the summer.
Yes.
To that point, and that was after struggling a little bit early in the practice. So I think Love has had this habit. It seems to be like a little bit too much adrenaline. Start of practice, overthrow. Then he settles down, and they really marched down the field. Well, I should say, did I have this right? They marched down the field once they restarted after the botch snap.
There was a botch snap. It went botch snap, Musgrave over the middle.
And then they reset.
No, it went botch snap, reset, Musgrave over the middle, wide open. Terrible defense. No one is even guarding him. 25 yards downfield, there's no one there. I don't really know what happened there. And then quick hit to Watson, which I actually thought was the most impressive play because, honestly, he might have taken it all the way.
That was the crosser?
It was like a quick crosser. I can't tell. He took like 3 or 4 steps and then quick in. But he caught it, and he kind of made a guy miss, honestly, and he might have taken it if it had been full-time, like not just 2-hand touch. And then
I think he only had to break like 1 tackle to go the whole distance.
And then dive up the middle to Aaron Jones for not many yards, and then kind of toss up to Christian Watson on a 50-50 ball to the right side of the end zone, touchdown. But yeah, definitely the best 2-minute drill we've seen out of the Packers starting offense so far by a lot.
Yeah, that was a nice little back shoulder throw as Watson mossed. I think it was Ballantyne.
Yeah, I don't know if I would call it a back
Not
shoulder
quite a
throw
boss.
because I wouldn't even necessarily call it back shoulder throw. He kind of just threw it on top of the guy's helmet, and Watson just plucked it off of him. The caveat is it was not the starting defense. Is the only caveat I have for it.
Right.
It
It
was
wasn't
on
the starting
Valentine, it was
corners.
and the defense I don't think was playing it particularly well. It felt like to me the Musgrave one in particular is like. There's no one around him for 10 yards. Like, where's the defense? I don't see them. But yeah, no, still exciting. I'm not going to rain on the
He
parade.
has seemed to have a knack for finding a soft spot in the zone and getting
fair.
open over the middle.
That's fair. And, he's so fast that maybe he's just getting there before they think he can. And they're surprised by his speed. Maybe defenses during the year will be surprised by his speed. I mean, it sounds like everyone who watches him is like, he's even faster than you realize. Like, this guy is a freak. That's the fastest kid alive. But no, he's a freak. But anyway, my next thing that I found interesting was that Owens really seems to have grabbed that number one safety spot. He took all the reps as the starting safety during family night. And then has continued taking the first team snaps this past week of practice. I'm excited about it because, he can tackle really well. He was the starting safety for the Texans last year, which, they didn't exactly have the best defense, but he has a lot of experience at safety the past year. And so that's something.
He got a lot of snaps last year.
Yeah,
and
some more experience.
He wasn't
back
very
there
good
is
in coverage, but he was a very good tackler. Very good grades tackling, not so great at coverage. But if we need somebody to clean up on the back end, he might be best suited for that.
Yeah, and I just think that's the most interesting thing. I don't really have a take on it, positive or negative, but it seems interesting because for most of offseason, it had been Ford and Savage. And it seems like really in the past week, Owens has snatched that job from Ford. Pretty convincingly.
And I don't know if the only other time I think since then that I've seen Ford mentioned as a starter
was with Owens.
Was when it was Owens and Ford.
Yeah.
There was a practice where it started off with Owens and Ford instead of Savage.
Yeah, which is...
But otherwise,
like,
I think Owens has been one of the two starters for like a week and a half or two now.
Yeah, and that's pretty important because, safety, even with Owens back there, is still one of the shakiest positions on the team. But it's nice to see it kind of maybe settling down a little bit. It's nice to see someone really take that job. I'm more excited about Owens taking the job than I would about Ford holding the job. Because I think Ford holding the job is like, okay, no one's really impressing. But the fact that Owens was able to jump up the depth chart a level means that he's at least doing something well enough to like make some headway on people who are already ahead of him. But yeah, that was my last thing.
I think you're right because I think the Packers do have this tendency, and probably most NFL teams do, going with what they know when there's nothing to distinguish them.
100%. And the fact that he is at least doing enough to distinguish himself and like jump a spot is really good. But anyway, that's our last thing from family night. The next thing to talk about is joint practices. On Tuesday, the Packers flew out to go to Cincinnati, and on Wednesday they had practice with the Bengals. The over on the fights hit, Dad. We had 2 fights during practice. Elton Jenkins
do you know, was it 1.5? Was the line set at 1.5?
I think the line was a half. We need to change this line because I had the line at a half. Personally, it was like, is there going to be a fight or not? And it's like, oh, there were 2 fights. Elton Jenkins was removed from practice after the second fight. The first one, it sounded like...
Because he was involved in both of them?
Yes, the first one, it sounded like someone came up and took a swing on him, and then he was still heated pretty much until he swung on DJ Reader for the second one and got kicked out of practice. So, it happens. It's joint practices. This is what happens during them. And when the Packers have have another set of joint practices with the Patriots in a week, I believe a week, expect the line to be 1.5 fights because the line will move. But anyway, besides that, I just wanted to get that out of the way and, just it did happen. I don't think we have any real notes on it. But anyway, Dad, what was your...
Yeah, I mean, Bakhtiari said like that first fight was on the Bengals. I think that was the one with the linebacker Jermaine Pratt, who got pancaked, I guess, and didn't.
Yeah, I guess he got pancaked, and he was mad because he didn't think the drill was supposed to be at full contact, and so he came up to Elton and tried to punch him in the face with a helmet on, which is stupid. But then Elton tried to punch DJ Reader in the face with a helmet on, which is also stupid. So, comme ci, comme ça, I guess. But anyway, we each had 3 things, though, that we found interesting from these joint practices. I think there's always a lot interesting. I'll lead off with mine since you led off with the last one. Because my first thing is I think one of the best parts of joint practices is getting non-Packers related eyes on the team, not people who see the team all the time.
and getting their opinions and getting maybe some more unbiased opinions. So here are 3 quotes just taken from Twitter regarding how the Packers looked in these practices. First one's from Sam Monson of PFF. Quote, felt like Jordan Love was deliberately being cautious with the football versus Bengals at practice today. Be interested to see if that's something they're trying to overemphasize for a quarterback who has always tended to make more big mistakes than really flies at this level. That's interesting. He felt like Jordan Love was being a bit conservative. And something in the Green 19 podcast that Silverstein, Ryan Wood, and I want to check really quick who the third
Cassidy
was.
Hill.
Cassidy Hill, yes. Cassidy Hill, thank you. We're saying was that Jordan Hill had kind of been struggling with the deep ball recently, so that kind of ties into that as well. And then so that's something. And then another quote about Jordan Love was DJ Reader, the Bengals defensive tackle that Elton got in a fight with, on Love. Quote, he looked decent back there. He wasn't just running to take off, wasn't doing any of that stuff. He was trying to go through his reads. He had a good demeanor back there. So, positive review from DJ Reader. I think Ryan Wood was the one who got that quote.
Much more complimentary review of Jordan Love than he had of
Elton. And then the last one is Joe Goodberry. This is not about Jordan Love, but he is a Bengals reporter, and he spent most of his time watching the Bengals offense versus the Packers defense. And this is a quote about the Packers defensive line. Quote, Van Ness is a handful already. Obviously, Kenny Clark too. The Bengals struggle with both. So, very interesting, Dad. Which of those 3 quotes kind of stood out the most to you?
It might be the Monson one
about Love deliberately. Because to me, it's the Goodberry one because we haven't really heard a lot about Van Ness.
But that was Van Ness.
Because and if he can be a real player for the Packers, I think that's especially in year 1, that's big time. But also, Van Ness was going against the 2s, so that is something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I had seen some reports. I'd missed this quote from Goodberry, but I had seen some mention that Van Ness was looking good in some of the plays.
Yeah, but so that was my first takeaways. I always like seeing, other people's eyes and what they think about the Packers, because I think when you're seeing the same people's takes over and over every day, it's good to get fresh eyes on it. What was your first big takeaway from joint practice, though, Dad?
Okay, so here where I think we've got a little bit of overlap here between what I've written and what you're getting maybe ready to say. So I had looking at the Green Bay defense in general, reportedly really stymieing the Bengals, albeit without Burrow. And some of the places to go for the video, and because, so as you mentioned, Joe Goodberry had a lot of practice videos on Twitter. If people want to go look for him, at Joe Goodberry, a lot of plays of the 11 on 11s and the defensive line versus offensive line 1v1s. I don't think they decided to scrap the cornerback wide receiver 1v1s because of conditions since it rained heavily, I think, before the practice. I'm not sure if that was why or not, but in general, I thought I watched some of those offensive line versus defensive line 1v1s, and I would say, looking at that Wyatt and Kenny Clark looked really good. Getting
that's
pressure.
Interesting because I thought I had Wyatt down for a loss. I had
Wyatt him for a.
I had Wyatt.
I may have seen 2 different reps.
Rep. Okay, because I only saw 1 rep for Wyatt, but I had him down for a 1 loss.
I had one that I thought he won, and then one that else, and I thought Slayton I had for a loss on the 1 rep of his I saw.
Yeah,
and
I had
Brooks. I had for a loss.
I had Wyatt, Slayton, and Brooks down for losses, and then Kenny and Wooden down for wins. Was what I had.
I had Kenny and Wooden for win, but I thought I saw Wyatt get a win as well. And maybe I saw 2 different sets.
Just the one that I saw.
And then overall, but this timing, the Bengals, and I think the only reports I saw, they had maybe 2 good plays on offense in the 11 on 11, a run by Mixon and a pass to Boyd. But otherwise, they weren't really able to do anything.
Got to remember Trevor Siemian at quarterback. No Joe Burrow.
I know.
No Joe Burrow for this practice. Because I had people sending me. I had friends sending me.
Take this with a pillar of salt.
Yes, I had friends sending me the Packers defense shutting down the Bengals. I was like, yeah, just remember, it's Trevor Siemian back there, not Joe Burrow. And they were like, that's right, he's not practicing. But no, but it's still, that's what you want to see. They're just 2 good plays out of all that. And I think specifically, what I had for this was that it was nice to see it sounds like the Packers' second-team D-line was really beating up on the Bengals' second-team O-line, which, apparently the Bengals' second-team offensive line is a bit of a question mark in general, according to some stuff that I was reading around on. But it's really good to see, Wooden have a couple of nice rushes that I saw, because it'd be pretty big if he played well, because he projects to be the fourth defensive lineman. The fourth defensive line last year for the Packers, for reference, was TJ Slayton, who played on 33% of snaps. So that's a pretty big role. But yeah, so that's something to keep in mind. And that if Wooden can be a big contributor this year, that'd be big. Or that if he can play well, because that role has a lot of snaps baked into it. And if he's succeeding against second-team offensive line, that's just a step to being more impactful in that role. Did you have anything else you wanted to say about that defensive line, or should I go on to my next one?
No, I think I had what I wanted to say about the defensive line as well, though. Did you have another one, or?
Well, I kind of said
we kind of overlapped on that one a little bit, but you had.
Yeah, that was the thing I wanted to say about the defensive line. And the next thing I wanted to say about the Packers in this joint practices is that Jair was not practicing, unclear why, but he was not practicing in the team drills. And Carrington Valentine was starting at outside corner instead, and he had a really good day. 2 pass breakups in the end zone, and just seemingly keeps on stacking successes as an outside corner. Now, I think the big question mark I have for him next is, how is he going to look in this preseason game when it comes to, okay, he's going to have to tackle now, because he's a pretty thin guy. So I think that's the big question mark I have for him now. It seems like he's being really successful in coverage so far, and obviously that's the most important thing for an outside corner, but you are going to have to tackle from time to time. But so that was the other piece of joint practice that I found interesting, was that he was next up at outside corner, and he did a pretty good job there. But yeah, so that's my next thing. Dad, what was your next thing from joint practices?
So one thing I thought was exciting is the touchdown to Dobbs, where he burns DJ Turner, a rookie cornerback from Michigan, who I actually liked. I think he went in the second round, and I think he may have been the fastest timed 40 at the combine this year, or if he wasn't, he was close. He's in the 4.2s, so super fast, and Dobbs gets behind him, and you can see Turner is just scrambling to try to catch back up to him, and Love drops it right in the bucket. Perfect play for a 50-yard touchdown, whatever it is.
Great throw.
So probably the best throw of the day by Love, and as well as a great route by Dobbs to get open. I imagine that Turner was playing. I have to go back and look at the video. Playing tight at the line of scrimmage, got beat early.
Yeah, it was kind of hard to tell from the video, because Dobbs kind of comes out of the picture for a second, but it looked like from the way Turner stopped that Dobbs kind of hit a hesitation stop and go, and then just ran past him and kind of just got in front of him. But yeah, that was definitely, I think, the throw of the day from the ones I saw. Apparently there was a nice throw to Henry Pearson, the fullback, down the sideline at one point.
Yes, on a wheel route, I think.
No one has any video of that I've seen, so can't say for sure, but a lot of people said that was a very nice throw as well.
Yeah, and then I think it was a little bit of an up and down day. I think Dobbs. Did he have a drop on another one? Do I remember that correctly? And then Love missed him on an earlier play.
There was one that
I think the first couple throws that.
There's
that
one
Love
deep
missed,
throw
I think,
to Dobbs that I've heard mixed reports on whether or not Love missed him or if Dobbs should have had it. I've kind of heard it both ways on that one, so hard to tell. And then I'm out of things from the joint practices. Did you have one more you wanted to add?
So the other thing I'd add is kind of tied into your first thing, which is about complimentary quotes from non-Packer related sources. So Jermaine Pratt, the Cincinnati linebacker who got into the first fight with Elton, had compliments for both the Green Bay receivers and Love. So from Ryan Wood, he said about the receivers, they're young, but they've been in the league for 2 years now. Well, we're playing it loose. We're playing it loose with time. But they said they're ready to go. I think they'll be a good team, good unit. I know they got a lot of backfire from A-Rod dropping balls and stuff, but I think they'll be ready. And then from Bill Huber, what he said about Love's, I think he's good. I thought he was solid, to be honest. I don't really know what to expect, because I was always thinking of A-Rod, but I think he's solid. I think he'll be a great player, to be honest. He learned from A-Rod. Now he gets the keys to run the system. So mostly complimentary. A little, not glowing, but
yeah. And
good things to say about both the receivers and Love from So we got that from two different defensive players of the Bengals with Pratt and Reader.
And there was another quote that I had heard someone reference, but I could not find written up anywhere, that Mike Hilton also had some nice things to say about Love, the corner for the Bengals, who was the one who
the guy who got the pick six,
who picked him at the goal line, and that was, I think, the biggest like the down play of the day was, it was apparently trips to the left side. And the read was just like, okay, throw the screen, but like Hilton was just super ready for it and jumped it right away. And so that's just something that comes with experience, I think. But yeah, that would have been pick six, Tow's about 98 yards. So, wouldn't be, it's better for it to happen now than for it to happen in season, is all I'm going to say.
Right.
But yeah.
So maybe like Love can say like, oh, that was not a good read.
Yeah, not ideal. But anyway, that kind of wraps up what we had to say about joint practices. And let's talk a little bit about the preseason game tomorrow, or today as you're listening to this. But anyway, I think we each had three things we're really excited for. I'm going to just go ahead and start us off. I think the first one is specifically how Love's going to look throwing the ball down the field. Seems like he's been a bit inconsistent on deep balls from what people have said recently. And so just kind of looking at how that's going to fare in a game environment. Obviously, he's had some big throws to Dobbs, one to Watson that we remember, one to Torrey that we remember. We've seen video of all those. But, just hopefully getting a bit more consistent with that deep connection. And, I'm just excited to see some Packers football, man. I'm so excited.
Right. This will look like a little bit more like a game. People are going to try to tackle to the ground. It's going to be like run like a regular game. We won't be necessarily being stars. And I was actually talking to Albert about this. Watching other teams' preseason games is hard to really get into because you don't know the depth of their bench. You don't know who those guys are that are in there. But when you're watching the Packers, you know it down to the 90th man. It's like, ooh, I really want to see this guy who's battling for the number 5 defensive line spot.
I'm like, oh, who's lined up at gunner? Like, oh, who do they got at the first team gunner? Like, that is some real sicko NFL like crap right there. Like,
right. And so you can't.
That's some sicko stuff.
You can't. Well, at least I don't think many people can get that level of engagement for all 32 teams. But
I think most Packers, people. I think most people can't get that level of engagement for their own team, to be honest. I think we're just a little warped in the brain.
That's entirely possible.
To be honest. But anyway, yeah, no, it's exciting. But yeah, what was your first thing?
But yeah, I would say I would just say about Love thing in particular with the deep ball. We had heard a lot about like overthrows on deep balls. I think more. There had a couple of underthrows
too, though.
And especially, I think early on in practices, I will see how it goes. Whether he's settled down early.
I think he's going to start not great, and I think we need to be prepared for that because every single like practice, big time, he's been a little too amped. He's been a little bit amped, a little adrenaline
he's like
pumping,
cranking it up.
And so if he overthrows someone by like 10 yards on the first throw, it's okay. It's all right.
They should call a 75-yard bomb down the field in the first play so we can just air it out full power.
To Musgrave. Why not?
To Musgrave.
But anyway, what are you excited about, though?
So one of the first thing on my list is I want to see how the O-line holds up after reportedly giving up a bunch of like sacks and pressures in this joint practice. And specifically, I want to see how some of the backup, so we're getting into the weeds, backup tackles. Specifically, we'll see if like Nyman, who I think got beat, but also Caleb Jones and Rasheed Walker.
I heard Trey Hendrickson was giving them. I heard Trey Hendrickson was giving them the business. I heard he was giving them the business on Wednesday.
Somebody reported 7 sacks. I mean, I don't know if that was just trolling and making up a number out of you-know-where. But I did see the one rep where he just blows up Nyman and Newman together. I don't know who was there at the guard.
Probably would have been Newman. They've been putting Newman in at backup guard. So, but the thing is, Hendrickson's.
So I'd like to see how Nyman. Yeah, but I'd like to see how Nyman performs. I'd like to see how possible tackle depth down the line. Walker and Jones perform. If they can, how they hold up in pass pro. Because I think a lot of times it's those guys who are getting beat. And,
there's someone you haven't mentioned that I'm most excited to see. I'm excited to see Sean Ryan. So, I want to see what he looks like in game action.
I've heard some people say Sean Ryan has slowly been developing into the legend of Sean Ryan in the last week of practice, where he's like, the dude is undefeated.
let's not get ahead of ourselves. But it's been 12 months since we've seen him play. It's been 12 months since we've seen him play football. Like, we didn't see him at all his rookie year. Reportedly, he's in a lot better shape this year. He's the one I think we have the most like unknown around him, and so that's probably the offensive lineman, like the depth offensive lineman.
That's what I was to say, because he played
for
this
special team
let's
snaps.
get into the interior offensive lineman. He had one special team snap last year. There was like, I think precisely
Was it one? I thought he had
zero
4.
buzz about him.
Okay,
I thought it was only one.
I think it was. I thought it was a couple, but anyway, I could be wrong.
And just about zero buzz of him in the preseason and training camp last year. I mean, remember him like struggling at? Do they have him at tackle and Tom at guard? And I'm like, should you have these guys flipped?
I don't remember that, but if that was I don't understand why you would do that. But anyway,
I don't remember what the alignment was, but I remember them being next to each other in some of the preseason action last year, whether it's the training camp or preseason games, and like, this is not going well.
Yeah, the next thing that I'm looking at is how Wooden and we've already talked about Wooden Brooks a lot, so I'm not going to talk too much about this, but how Wooden and Brooks look specifically against the run, because they're going to need a lot of snaps out of those two guys, like almost immediately. That 4th and 5th D linemen are going to play a lot, even without injury, and if there is injury, they're going to really play a lot, and they're going to need them to hold up against the run. So the sooner they can be contributors, the better. And I think this is like the first test to be like, okay, can you be complete? Like, I mean, obviously it's a lot to ask to be complete NFL players in your first preseason game. That's not realistic. But can you have some successes against the run? Can you have some successes like penetrating like along the offensive line or getting pressure in on third down situations and pass rushing situations? They're going to be two of the guys I'm watching most closely on the defense, I think.
Yeah, I think, and for both of them, the reasons to worry, because like Wooden's a little undersized, and Brooks played edge in college. So how are they going to hold up in the interior against the run? I actually have a similar thing. I'm going to jump to this one as my next one, because I also had about how is the D-line going to hold up specifically against the run. But what I was like, can Slayton and Wyatt hold their ground against the run to help out Kenny Clark?
I don't think Kenny's going to play it down.
No.
Oh,
I don't
mean
help him in
general.
this game.
I see what you're saying.
I mean, in general, show that. Are they going to start showing that they can hold up in the run and help Kenny in the season?
I wish I
had
put
we see
Wyatt.
Some of it now.
I wish I'd put Wyatt, thinking about it now, because, it would theoretically he should be doing damage in this game, because you're playing against a team that doesn't have a great O-line to begin with, and you're a second-year first-round pick who's made a lot of good noise at camp. It would go a long ways to like building confidence in him if he just goes out there, plays 2 series, they take him out because he's just beating up on everyone.
Wrecking shop.
Like, it's just like it's like, okay, you're good. Like,
that would be awesome, and I think he is going to play some.
Oh no, he's definitely going to play. I would be surprised if he didn't, at least. I think.
Yeah, I think he's going to play. I would play more than two possessions. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, no, my point is, if he's just beating up on everyone, like,
so good. It's like, okay,
so good they might as well take him out. It's one of those like NBA things, just like too good for summer league. Like, you're just out there like 8 of 8 to start the game. Like, no one can guard you. It's like, all right, like let's get some other guys some work. The last thing that I'm excited about though is to see Musgrave's speed live and to see Kraft play. I'm really excited for the 2 new tight ends. And just to see all of the young players, but specifically them, and see Musgrave's speed live, like, and see how real it is. I'm excited for that. That's kind of my last thing that I'm really looking forward to for preseason game 1.
So my last one is kind of similar, but a different position. I'm really excited to see Jaden Reed in real game action. He seems to be like firmly entrenched as the starter at slot, regardless of whatever the unofficial/official depth chart says.
Call me crazy, but I feel like we've heard the most, like, from any of the receivers. Have we heard the most from him in training camp? I'm not talking about OTA's minicamp, but just training camp. I feel like we've almost heard the most from Reed of any of the receivers.
Maybe Dobbs. I don't know.
Maybe, yeah, but
yeah,
a
Reed's been.
Amount.
All the reports make it sound like he's looking good. And the few clips you get to see, he looks explosive.
Yeah.
Running by people at speed. I'm excited to see what happens when everybody's playing at full speed and somebody's actually trying to tackle you. What is he going to do to get open and with the ball in his hands?
And he was a pretty good tackle breaker in college. Like, he's pretty strong, like core, strong, like lower half. So, but he's a smaller guy. But we'll see.
But yeah, anything else you wanted to add, or
that was it.
Okay. Well, anyway, exciting. Preseason game 1 tomorrow at 4 o'clock West Coast time, 6 o'clock Central time, 7 o'clock Eastern time. Set your alarms. It's almost here. NFL Network is when it's going to be on. I don't know why I'm doing a free plug for NFL Network, but if you're looking for the game, it's on NFL Network. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. Like we said earlier, come give us a follow on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. Come subscribe to us on your podcast platform of choice or on YouTube. Either would really help our numbers, and we really appreciate it. Once the games start in earnest, we're going to be doing 2 episodes a week, so get psyched for that. And thank you so much for listening. But until next time, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.